with the government so heavily set on fixing our society by arresting the problem, it feels as though politicians and the public alike have been highlighting and shouting for years now that not one person has served time for what's being called the social murder of the residents of Grenfell. So there were 19 companies, 50 individuals named in the 1,700-page report earlier this week. And the chair, Martin Morbick, said that all of the deaths in Grenfell were avoidable. I know Lewis talked about the release of the report earlier this week on Wednesday, and you can watch that live back for more detail on the findings itself. I think one of the clips that I remember from the time, but did really shake me to see again, was this footage of Erick Pickles during the inquiry.
Together, but by all means, sir, feel free to ask me as many questions as you like. But could I respectfully remind you that you did promise that we would be away this morning, and I have changed my schedules to fit this in. I do have an extremely busy day meeting people, but this is more important than anything. But I would urge you to use your time wisely.
Time wisely from Erick Pickles, which is, I think probably one of the most indicative signs of just how disillusioned we feel with politicians at the moment. That said, now the findings have been released and now the report is underway. There's a lot of remorse and apology being shared. Keir Starmer made an apology in the Commons when he talked about the report, despite the fact that a lot of MPs literally left the Commons immediately beforehand. But there's actually a lot of businesses that are still refusing to take any part of the blame. There are a couple of examples here that were compiled by The Guardian. This is the findings from the report itself, and then we're going to have a look at the responses from them. So this is regarding the company Arconic. They were accused of deliberately and dishonestly concealing from the market the true position in relation to the product that was sold for use on Grenfell in cassette form. The report also recommended that Arconic itself must take responsibility for the use of this on Grenfell Tower because it knew that the sale of the product had been attained on the basis of the British Board of Agreement certificate. Agreement, my bad, which it was well aware gave a misleading impression of the way in which the product in cassette form reacted to fire. This was the response from Arconic. They didn't do any of that, and actually it was fine. The reports were all publicly available. They made them available for their customers. They did not conceal information or mislead any certification body, customer, or the public. We have one more that I'd really like to put a spotlight on here, which is the company Celotex. Celotex embarked on a dishonest scheme to mislead its customers in the wider market, and the dishonest and cynical way in which RS5000, the insulation, was tested and marketed reflected a culture within Celotex stretching back to at least 2009. Celotex's response was that they conducted their own review to interrogate the circumstances in which the product had been tested, launched, and marketed. They found that the review demonstrated the cladding system described met the relevant safety criteria. That system was substantially different to the one used at Grenfell Tower. And then decisions about design, construction, and the selection of materials for the tower were made by construction industry professionals. These companies are still refusing to take the blame. There was another report earlier today, I think, of a contractor who was saying that it wasn't his fault, it was the company's fault. The companies are blaming contractors and the government. The government are seemingly very upset at the actions of these companies as well. Davey, are we going to get any kind of accountability taken seriously from any of these parties?
I don't think so. I think that it fits into the kind of, the wider climate that we've been living in, where it's, personal responsibilities everywhere, and yet it's everybody else's fault. I think one of the weirdest things for me, in terms of what I've seen this week, Emily Maitlis talked on her podcast about, like, she was going to sleep and apparently there was a lot of noise, and she turned to her husband and her husband was like, "Oh, there's a fire," and she was like, "Oh, thank goodness, I thought it was something bad," because she was so accustomed to the idea that a fire was nothing. We're really safe here and compliant, and that's that was fine. And I think it fits into this very long-standing set of issues we've got. Like, there were warnings back as early as 1999 when a report came out that said currently the majority of cladding being used is safe, but we need to keep an eye on it. And they said in this report in 1999, it should not take a fire just like Grenfell for people to start paying attention. Egregious as that is, the irony is we've had a fire like Grenfell. It's nearly a decade later, and there's people still going, "It wasn't me." Absolutely insane.
It's I think it's just gross. Like, I don't know. It's listening to the findings from the report earlier today, and also thinking back to. Do you remember just after Grenfell when I think Jeremy Corbyn wore the green tie, and that
Yeah.
was immediately like a source of mockery in Parliament. I think there's a lot of words about how things need to be better, how things need to be resolved. I think Angela Rayner said that fire hazards need to be addressed more quickly. Yes, I feel like that should be an obvious one at this stage. But then seeing that clip as well earlier today of them emptying the house just before the findings were shared, it just feels like this brazen disregard for anyone who's considered like a normal person.
It's what's so frightening about it is at every single step there were failures. I'm not ashamed to admit that I cried my eyes out twice while I was reading through the phase two stuff today because it was like you said, the companies were dishonest. They didn't test their products properly. If you read, like they tested one thing, and because there were similar sounding components, they thought that they could extend the zero, what's group zero accreditation of non-flammability to this other product, but the inside wasn't treated. So when it was broken into the cassette style that was put onto Grenfell, that exposed it and made it a source of flame. And so that happened, and then the contracting happened where people were more interested in lobbying money than they were about looking at the actual safety of it, and like all the way through that, then the actual fire happens, and you get the kind of go back to your flats and do what you're told. Then those people die. Jacob Rees-Mogg stands in Parliament and goes, "Well, if you were smart, you wouldn't do that." The level of disrespect, and it's just gone on and on. It's just gone on and on. From top to bottom, everybody involved has screwed over these people. And then on a personal level as well, I went to Byline Fest a couple of years ago. I can't remember exactly when it was. And there was a survivor of Grenfell there, traumatized to high hell, speaking about their experience, not of what happened on the night, but the way that they've been treated since by government ministers, by MPs, by safety regulators, the threats, the intimidation, the completely ignoring and dismissal, trying to make her sound crazy. It was it was heart-wrenching to listen to her speak about the way that she's been treated. It's absolutely appalling, and it hasn't stopped.
No, I mean I can't quite get my head around it at the moment. In the same as I was saying earlier with the an American Turkish guy has been shot in the head by Israel, by the IDF, and the response from the White House is, well, we're very disturbed. There's nothing behind those words. And that I know a lot of the commentary around the Grenfell report has been that if this was private housing, if this was expensive private housing, none of this would have been an issue. It's insane to see, like you said, the amount of essentially just overlook these problems so that we can get a little bit more cash out the back of it. Just individual salespeople at different stages. The fact that I completely forgot about the Jacob Rees-Mogg thing. Where he said, it was like, yeah, if you were smart, you wouldn't have listened to the instructions to stay in your flat.
Appalling.
I guess it's still relatively fresh news this week. I'm hoping that it leads to some sort of actual action being pulled in, but I think looking at some of the lobbying groups that are on the side of Labour at the moment, we've got a lot of private housing developments. We've got a lot of these businesses kind of coming back into the fray. There's time for them to take action about it. It feels like from what we've seen so far, a lot of it is kind of like slowly nodding your head and expressing your sympathies and then sort of fucking off in your nice car.
There's two things that we need to be really deeply concerned about, which is who's lobbying Labour, which absolutely are these large manufacturers. They're the party of big business, after all. Let's not forget, they're very proud to wear that moniker, so let's remember what it means. But additionally, one of the things that's really, really deeply concerned me for a while is one of Rachel Reeves' magic salves, a neoliberal fix for the economy is deregulation. And one of the things she's talked about is the deregulation of the building sector. And we're days out from phase 2 of a report that's highlighted in excruciating detail that there are incredibly obvious oversights and weaknesses within our regulation framework for this sector. And it's absolutely terrifying to hear our government talking about the idea of further deregulation to get building faster. And I pointed this out earlier. My concern is we'll do the building. What happens in 15 years when we deregulated away from more safety concerns and we have another Grenfell? Whose fault will that be?
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.